one of the reasons married couples have so much trouble, especially the reason they have so much trouble early on, right after they get married, the first couple of years, is that they discover that all those years when they were waiting to get married, looking forward to it, they developed some false expectations of what it was really going to be like, some unrealistic expectations about what their spouse was going to do for them, what their spouse was going to look like in the morning, what their spouse was going to look like after 30 years. I was reading just this morning about a man I think it was Larry Dunaway, as a matter of fact, standing on the scales, holding his stomach in real big. Standing on the scales, holding his stomach in. And his wife said, Larry, that does not help a thing in the world. He said, yes, it does. It's the only way I can see the numbers on the scale. They met in first grade at Odin School. They weren't anticipating, she wasn't anticipating that. None of us know what to expect fully when we get married. And the same goes for our relationship with God. Most of us come to Christ at a fairly early age, usually most often when we're children. And as children, we can't possibly even begin to know what real adult life is going to be like, what the challenges are going to be, the challenges to us financially, relationally, and the challenges to our faith, things that will put our faith to the test. And if there's anything in my belief system that is incorrect, if anywhere along the way I began picking up false understandings of who God is, how God operates, what I can expect from Him, if I get those unrealistic expectations and then I hit teenage years or even especially adulthood, and I start realizing the way I thought God operates is not what I'm experiencing here at all. Very, very similar to the expectations for marriage when we discover we had some false expectations. Now, what do people do in marriage? What's the first thought that goes through the average person's mind when they realize their spouse is not quite what they thought, or there are some additional benefits or baggage that came with this spouse, and I didn't know that was part of the deal? Once we start realizing that there's more to this than we realized, more to this person than we realized, it's harder than we expected, the first thing a lot of people conclude is, oh, I obviously picked the wrong person. And once that idea gets embedded, I picked the wrong person, and I know I picked the wrong person because things aren't going well. If I'd picked the right person, it would be smooth, right? Married people, 50-year married people, is that the way it is? No. Be careful, especially if you're newly married within the last 5-10 years. Be very careful about making any assumptions based on what you think your spouse ought to be as opposed to what they are. Because it may be that you simply had some unrealistic expectations that nobody was really going to meet. And even if another person had met your expectations in one area of life, I promise you there would have been a whole other area of life, maybe 2 or 3 areas of life, where they would have driven you crazy. See? You don't understand that. You'll start looking for a chance to bail. You'll start looking for another partner. Same thing happens in our relationship with God. You picked up any misunderstandings along the way of who God is. And as you go out into this wide, wide world to seek your fortune, and what you thought back in third grade doesn't square with what you're experiencing at age 39, your first thought will often be, for many of us, our first thought will be, oh, well, I guess I just thought God was real. I guess I just thought God was real. But he's obviously not, because if he were real, he would meet my expectations. That's just as immature, that's just as short-sighted as a person who concludes they married the wrong person because they run into some things they don't like. So, last week and this week, what we're doing is we're looking at false gods and how they set us up with false expectations. First of all, God on demand. You heard of dish on demand? Well, there's also God on demand. That's the kind of God that a lot of people believe in. And the reason we believe in it is things people have told us, coupled with some scriptures that really do seem to support the idea. I want to give you an example of what I'm talking about. This God on demand. The assumption there is that the God on demand, this God, he will respond to sincere, selfless request in the same way that I would. Now, that's not a crazy thing to assume, but it's not taking into account when you say that God would respond to requests the way you respond to requests. Think of it this way. You don't respond to requests the same way your 5-year-old does. They ask for things that seem perfectly legitimate to them. They ask sincerely, and they just can't get it. Why? They can't have ice cream right now. Totally sincere. You as an adult, you realize that's not quite, there's more to it than that kid realizes. There are things they don't know. Same way with God. If we're not careful, we'll assume that God sees things the same way we see things. That he is looking at the same set of facts we're looking at. In reality, you and I usually have one or two of the facts coupled with some assumptions and expectations and very strong emotions. You put all that together, and we can feel like this is surely what God's going to do. He's got to answer this prayer. If he wouldn't answer this, what would he do? Now, this comes out. This type of God is disproved in little ways, big ways, fun ways, not so fun ways. I began discovering that this God on demand just might not be real. Way back in second grade. It was 1978. The Dallas Cowboys were playing the Pittsburgh Steelers in the Super Bowl. Half of my world was Alabama football and Dallas Cowboy football. And I knew that Tom Landry, the coach, was a Christian. And he influenced as many of his players as he could to be Christians. And so when Dallas got behind in the beginning of the fourth quarter and it was looking bad, I knew what to do. I went straight to the bathroom, got down on my knees in private. God, Dallas is a Christian team. They are a Christian team. The Pittsburgh Steelers are not. They are not Christians. They're bad, God. And if you will cause Dallas to win this game, it will glorify you. This is in your best interest, God. Don't mess this up. Oh. Well, God, God heard me just a little bit because he did give Roger Staubach an opportunity to throw a pass. Shoom, 20-yard bullet right in the hands of this dude who dropped it in the end zone. And with that went a truckload of my faith in on-demand God. But even as a kid, I was able to realize, okay, that's just kind of a lighthearted thing. But later, it was much more serious, much more sincere, my request. God, this girl is obviously the one for me. I mean, she meets all the qualifications. I mean, you know what I'm looking for here. She's got the right color hair. She comes from the right place. She goes to the right church. And she's really, really pretty, God. And so, isn't it pretty obvious to you? It's obvious to me. I thought, well, it's obvious to me. This is what I need. It wasn't so obvious to God. But later on, I did the Garth Brooks thing, and thanks God for unanswered prayers, because I found a girl who really was right for me. And I honestly, seriously, I look back on some of those girls I had crushes on and begged God to play Cupid and shoot him in the heart with an arrow or something like that. And I thank him, because I'd be divorced now. I really, really would. Not very many girls would have stuck with me through all the ups and downs of ministry. And my wife, Mena, is as true as the Alamo. She's got this unconditional love. And back then as a teenager, I didn't even know what unconditional love was. But God did. And through her, my wife, God has taught it to me. Be careful about assuming that because it seems so obvious to you that it's just that obvious to God. He's dealing with some factors you probably have not considered. Now, let me go quickly to the next one. This one we're going to call Sweetie Pie God. Sweetie Pie God, Sweetie Pie God is the God that gives you the warm fuzzies. That's the God that makes you feel like a teenager in love. That's the God that you remember feeling for the first time at youth camp. And the music was just so right. And the devotional that the youth director gave was right on. And you were focused on God that week. And it's like he was showering you with his presence and with his peace. And you went away from there fired up. And you had a genuine experience. You had a powerful experience that God wanted you to have, but there's one little mistake there. You went away assuming that this is the way it's supposed to feel all the time. And just as for the most people in marriage, they get the heebie-jeebies when they're around that person they love. And they can't even be at rest unless they're with that person. I remember that. But that doesn't last for a lot of people. I got to be careful here, because one time 20 years ago I said that in a church, and this man hollered out, "Speak for yourself." Apparently some people keep the warm fuzzies, just the movie romance stuff going forever, but my goodness, I'm kind of glad we don't, or we'd never be able to separate for somebody to go to work and for somebody to keep the kids while I go have some time by myself. That wouldn't be practical for life just to be that way for a married couple all the time. Well, when it comes to a relationship with God, you can experience God's presence. I mean, that's one of the most important things I believe, and one of the most important things I preach, is that you can know him and you can learn how to recognize him when he's near, and you can feel his presence probably more than most of us think is possible. I now feel his presence more than I thought was possible 30 years ago. However, along with saying that, I got to tell you this. Just because you're having a day, or, listen to this, just because you're having a year when God seems far away, where it seems like the heavens are brass and your prayers bounce off the ceiling, and you feel so alone, so far from Him. First thing some people do is assume, well, God is this Spirit that I always feel, and if I don't feel Him anymore, He must not be there anymore. Sweetie pie God. Sweetie pie God. Let me give you an analogy to help you see the problem with that. Do you know, or have you noticed, has this ever occurred to you, that some of the most constant, consistent, reliable forces in the world operate constantly without you even being aware they're going on? Every one of you has been breathing for the last 18 minutes and 50 seconds. Very unlikely that you stopped and noticed any of those breaths, though you took well over 100 or more. And yet that's vital. You could not live without it. Oxygen, you don't make it long without oxygen. You can go a few weeks without food, but oxygen goes away, you go away. It's always there like God. But that doesn't mean you're constantly thinking, okay, come on in, oxygen. Ooh, that's some good oxygen right there. What a good breath. That is one of those things you may not be aware of, but it's there. It's keeping you alive all the time. The temperature. Think about the temperature in the room. Now, to me, it's very hot, and therefore I'm very aware of it. I sweat every Sunday here. But I don't know. The rest of you don't seem very hot, are you? I mean, anybody hot? Anybody hot? One or two. Okay. We've got about 7 or 8 people that are hot. If you're hot, you're aware of the temperature in the room. If you're not, it probably hasn't even crossed your mind. And yet it's been that same temperature for the last 20 minutes. You were not aware of it. You only become aware of it when it gets to one extreme of hot or one extreme of cold. Then you notice it. Well, the Spirit of God is much like that. David said, where can I go from your presence? If I go to the backside of the sea, you're there. If I go down into the depths of the earth, behold, you're there. But you won't always feel that. I'll tell you this, though, before I move on. You will not always, constantly, 24/7, feel God's presence. But a huge part of spiritual growth, a big, important thing about practicing spiritual disciplines, like daily and eventually constant prayer, living in a mindset of prayer. Spiritual disciplines like that prayer, like taking a scripture and meditating on it, chewing that verse, reading it in the morning, chewing on it all day long, like a cow chewing the cud. You want to get everything there is in that verse for you. You cough it back up and you chew it some more and you fully digest it. And then there are spiritual disciplines like fasting, silence, sharing, taking a spiritual retreat to go away somewhere and just focus on God. Those kinds of things, here's what they do. They don't make God any more real than He ever was. That's impossible. I mean, you can't become more real than real. They also don't make God any closer to you than before. Acts 17:27. The Apostle Paul was talking to a group of people who were looking for God. Looking for God. People who were very sincerely looking for God. And here's what he says. talking about God. His purpose was for the nations to seek after God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Last line is the important part I want you to see. Though he is not far away from any of us. When you're seeking God, you're not seeking something that's out there on the dark side of Nahum. You're seeking something that's right there, right in you, all around you. That's what you're seeking. So maybe a better word that would help us, instead of seeking, which gets us off on a journey somewhere, awareness, becoming conscious of the God who's been there all along. Your spiritual disciplines, your spiritual growth makes you become more and more increasingly aware of the God who's always there. That will result in you feeling his presence more. But just wishing for it or whining or getting bogged down in doubt because you don't feel it like you used to, that's not going to help. It's not going to help. By the way, also, let me say this. If you are currently at a place in your life where many of us find ourselves, if you're in a place of doubt, skepticism, you're finding it really hard to believe right now. You're finding it very difficult to trust because so far as you can see, God is not doing anything. And it's very discouraging and it's scary. I have been through those times. And I can tell you two things about them. Number one, they are not fun. Number two, they are not permanent. I suppose they'd only be permanent for the person who was at a place in life where they did not feel God's presence, and they got so discouraged that they just threw up their hands and quit. They're done. But if you keep going, if you seek, you will find eventually. I mean, when you're after a God who's really not anywhere away, does that even make sense? You seek him, you will find him. You knock and it will be open. You ask, you'll receive. The only person who finds himself permanently in that spot is the person who really wants to stay in that spot. You know the difference between honest doubt and real doubt? I have a lot of respect for honest doubt. I've had plenty of honest doubt. Honest doubt is not something to be ashamed of. Honest doubt is when you want to believe. You're like the man who said to Jesus in the book of John, Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief, because I got both going on here. But I don't believe fully, but I want to. Jesus worked in his life in such a way that that partial belief grew into a full belief. The person who wants to believe, they're struggling, but they're involved in an act. What they don't realize, this struggle, this faith struggle, is an exercise of their faith that results in breakthrough. It results in stronger faith, not weaker faith. So don't be afraid of honest doubt. Just make sure that if you got honest doubt, you seek some help from somebody who can guide you through that, who can at least give you some sort of direction. Otherwise, you will falsely think that you're the only person in the whole church that's experiencing this. And you'll think that because you're experiencing this doubt, there's something wrong with you and you're probably not really even a Christian and you might as well give up. That's false. On the other hand, there's honest doubt. There's also dishonest doubt. Dishonest doubt is the person who doesn't believe and they are proud of it. And I know y'all have been around this kind of person. You've seen them. They take delight in mocking the Bible, the church, Christianity as a whole. They tear it apart. They look for a conversation where they can debate with you and throw some question to you that sends your head spinning, and they walk away feeling smarter than you. That is dishonest doubt. That person will often say, I wish I could believe, but I can't. I just got to be honest. I just can't believe that. Well, if they were telling the truth, if they wanted to believe, they would be seeking, not fighting. They would be knocking at the door, not trying to barricade the door to keep anybody else from going through it. Whole lot of difference between honest doubt and dishonest doubt. We got dishonest doubt. The first thing to do is repent. God, I'm sorry. I got to confess. I don't even want you to be real. Because if you're real, that means there are things I've got to deal with. There are things I probably am going to have to change. I confess that. Have mercy on me, a sinner. And now, Lord, I believe, I want to believe, help my unbelief. There's a prayer. I promise you He will answer if you keep seeking till you find. You know, there's a saying that goes back to Winston Churchill in the darkest days of World War II, when Britain was bombed every night, London especially, blown to smithereens by Nazi warplanes. And Churchill got on the radio talking to his people. And he said, listen, when you're going through hell, keep going. Now, there's a lesson for anybody going through a difficult time. But in the context of what we're talking about today, you're going through a period of doubt. Okay, good, fine. Keep going. This is not a good place to stop. It's a lonely place to stop. It's an eternally lonely place. Stop. Get up and keep going.